What's up, everyone? Today we are going to cover how to work with samples in Ableton and all of the super cool stuff that Ableton can do with samples, just in like audio sample format. So we're pretty much not going to be working with MIDI tracks at all today. And get rid of these and just open up a couple of audio tracks for us. Ableton is really awesome when it comes to working with samples. I just kind of want to cover everything in the clip view, how to get some really creative sounds from samples. Yeah, so it's going to be relatively a quick one. Hopefully I can get this done in like about 20 minutes, and you'll be off to the races, so to speak. Um, let's pull in a couple of things. Let's actually just pull in like a yeah, I'll just pull in like a kick and a snare. Just so we have like some sort of little beat. I'm gonna do everything just in audio samples today. So ooh, that is loud. Let's pull this. Let's see. Right. Yeah, we'll just pull that over a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna pull in some hi-hats too, just so we have a little like sharp. Okay. Sure, that works just fine. Okay. So starting off here, um, when we pull stuff in, whether or not these samples are going to be warped is a preference that you can set based on your preferences. Go to record, warp, launch, and there's a bunch of preferences in Ableton that you can set in here. So automatically, I have this set to auto warp short samples. This is going to try and choose if it's like a one shot or a loop. It doesn't always get it right, but for the most part, most of my samples will come in here already warped. Now, auto warp long samples, I have that on. You might want to turn that off. It doesn't really matter. You can just turn on and off the warp once they come in, but just do know that there are a bunch of preferences surrounding how things come on automatically warped and whatnot on here. Default warp mode is right here. We'll get into what that means in a second. Creating fades on clip edges. That basically means that every time I pull open or pull an audio sample into my arrangement, you're going to get these small little, let's see, that is about 4 milliseconds. And in case you're curious where I'm seeing that, that's down here in this little section in the bottom. That's about 4 milliseconds of clip fade. And actually, I'm going to move this, let's see, over here, kind of off the screen a little bit. Okay, perfect. So yeah, that preferences option that says to automatically create fades on clip edges. Every time I pull any audio sample into my arrangement, it's going to have that little fade automatically created. And that is mostly just to make sure that you don't have any like pops or anything from samples. A lot of times samples, if they have audio information that either starts right at the beginning or goes right to the very end of the clip, when the speaker cone essentially, or when the signal pops back to a 0 point from that, if that movement is too sharp, then you'll get a little bit of a pop or a crack in your audio, in your signal. So that's just a way to kind of avoid that. However, you want to pay attention to that kind of stuff, because especially with things like drums, you'll see that like in this kick drum right here, you have a lot of important information right there. That's the real transient of the kick. So like if I solo that, without that, where that was, it sounds like this. And without that clip fade, it sounds like this. So you get a lot more kind of sharpness to that attack there. So mainly on drums and one shots and things, you just want to be cautious if you have that auto clip fade selection, pressed. Then just go in and make sure that when you are pulling in like drum samples, especially, that you kind of adjust it to taste. Sometimes I do actually use them to get a little bit softer kick. So sometimes I will kind of use this intentionally to get a little bit a kick with like that's a little bit more muted in the top. But anyway, moving on, we'll go in here. This is unwarped, as you can see. This is warped. I'm gonna actually just unwarp that. This is unwarped as well. I'm going to get rid of these kicks and make them all unwarped. For one shots, for drums, oftentimes I like leaving them unwarped. There are plenty of times where I warp them too. What is warping though? Well, we're going to get into that in just a sec here. So first off, let me just pull a bunch of these guys into here. All right, great. So warping, and actually let me just kind of cover first everything that you're going to see in this clip view down here once you have an audio sample selected. So in this clip view, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see this sort of module, this box over here, which has some basically information on like where the clip is going to start. Like if I pull that up, you see how you don't really see it. See how if I pull this up, it'll actually move this start marker into the clip. I'll be honest, this section right here, I hardly ever use. I'll show you basically ways to do all the same stuff, but with a little more like hands-on movement. So for the most part, let's gloss over this right now. Like I said, I make almost 100% of my music without ever touching this section. When you are in session mode and you pull clips into here, there are a few more things in that section that you might need, but for right now, we're just going to stick with arrangement view, and I'm going to mostly cover these modules over here and how to do stuff with them right in the arrangement. So starting off, you have your gain. If I want to just make this sample louder or softer, I can just adjust that right there. And your pitch, I can make it, let's actually get something a little more melodic just for demonstration purposes. Let's find like a good loop, not of drums. Ooh, let's find something that's like, ooh, maybe we can just find like a piano loop or something. That would be cool. Let's see. All right, that's great. That's perfect. Okay, I'm gonna make this just so it's like, I don't know, I guess somewhat in tune with the kick, which I think is a D sharp. So just go up one semitone. So anyway, when this warp is on, actually let's start with it off. So this is the sample. I'm gonna solo this. This is the sample we got here. Just like a piece of vinyl, like a record on a record player. Since pitch is a function of frequency, frequency, is oscillation over time. It's linked to time. It's intrinsically linked to time. A record on a record player, when you slow down the record, the pitch goes down. When you speed up the record, the pitch goes up. Now with warp off, those two things are intrinsically linked, just because that's sort of how sound works. So with that being said, when I move the pitch up here, you're going to see this get shorter. And when I move the pitch down, you're going to see it get a lot longer or slower to play. So the reason that we have this warp mode in here is because warp mode allows us to essentially separate those two things, separate the link between pitch and time. The computer, the software has a few different ways it can do that. And so I'm going to walk you through what each of those warp modes kind of do, how they sort of work, and how you can kind of use them. So if you want the most true audio quality in a sample with a different sort of pitch change, if you want to pitch it up or pitch it down, then you honestly want to leave warp off, because the audio itself will play in the exact sort of fidelity that the sample is in. So like this sample is going to be unchanged except for the pitch and the speed if I leave it unwarped and pitch it down. It's literally the exact sample. You have no extra artifacts or anything. You just hear it in all its glory. So put this back on 0. We're going to turn on warp mode. So with warp mode, you have these 6 different warp modes. So let's start with repitch first. Repitch is essentially the same as leaving it unwarped, except that the difference here is you actually don't have the option to pitch it up or down here. No matter what I do there, it's going to play exactly the time here, or the pitch that this length of sample and that speed of playback is going to allow for. However, with repitch, if I take this and I slide this out or in, it'll adjust the pitch to match the speed of playback there. Okay, so essentially what repitch is doing is it's the exact same sort of aspect as when it's unwarped. Like pitch and time are intrinsically linked. However, instead of affecting the length of the sample, making it play back faster or slower, or making the sample itself longer or shorter by adjusting the pitch, instead, we're actually adjusting the pitch by first adjusting the length of the sample. So this is a good way to, if you want like the truest audio fidelity and a sample needs to fit in a certain amount of arrangement space or a certain amount of time in your arrangement, this is a good way to keep the sample like the truest to its original sound while fitting it in exactly the timing that you need. So moving on from there, we're going to go to complex mode. I know I'm going sort of out of order here, but to me, it just kind of makes sense. This is how I normally go through these in the lessons that I teach. So complex mode is going to be the closest thing for most types of sounds to the original fidelity. When I say like fidelity, I just mean like true to the original sound. So complex mode means that I can pitch this up or down. This is going to stay the same length of time. So let's let's make sure this is actually lined up here. Actually, let me do this. Okay, so complex mode is going to, if I move this pitch up or down, it's going to do its best to keep the fidelity as true to the original as possible, while also keeping the sample length the same as you have it. So now I can adjust pitch independently of time, or independently of the sample getting longer or shorter, playing back faster or slower. Complex on its own is pretty simple to use, and I would say it works best with like most natural instruments like vocals or guitars or pianos, things like that. It doesn't work great in my experience with like things with transients, and transients, just FYI, are like on a drum, for instance. This is sort of the transient right here, or on this part, like basically the loudest part of a drum hit or any piece of a sound. In here, you could kind of call like this the transient of this note right here. And I'll kind of point that out. I'm sure it'll come up a few more times in this tutorial and others. So anyway, going back to this, it doesn't work that great for drum samples, but it is great for a lot of organic textured instruments. So we also have Complex Pro, which is basically the same thing as complex, but with a little bit more control. So it uses something called formants. Formants are a type of filtering that are based off of, I guess, from my research into this, like the human vocal tract, like the filter that our throat and vocal chamber and mouth sort of create. And it uses formants to try and keep the sound true to its original sound. So let me just kind of demonstrate this, because for the most part, a lot of these you'll really need to just like play with. I don't want to go too far into, a million different examples of them, but just kind of give you a basic overlay of like when I use them and what they kind of do. So with formants, it might be a little more noticeable if I do it like this. So you can kind of hear how there's some filtering going on there, some frequencies that are more or less present depending on where you have that formants. Now be aware too that when you put the pitch in the opposite direction, so plus above 0, it sort of works in the opposite directions. So where now that filter sort of closes as I actually go toward 100. Envelope just means how much of that effect it's basically going to put in there. So it'll just be even more noticeable the more you have that envelope up. So I'm going to double click on that to return it to its default value there and move on to the next one. So Beats. Beats is actually really great. It's really great as a creative tool, and it's really great as just like a general sound shaping tool. The most often used application for Beats mode, I would say, is for drums. Let me actually pull in like a drum loop, so it's really obvious here. All right, sure. Okay, so if I take this and I put it on beats, by default, what the beats mode is going to try and preserve, means keep intact, is the transients. So that's, again, each one of these little sections, like that guy here and that guy here, even like that is a little transient and that's a little transient. Each one of those is a transient. So it's going to pick up each one of those and try and preserve them. If I leave it at 100, it's pretty much going to play the entire sample. And the playback mode, you have 3 different options: all the way through and stop, all the way through and repeat again from where that section is. And the section in this case is going to be carved out based on the transients. And then this is all the way back and then back in reverse order. Now, the playback mode is going to, like, think about it like this. If I am going to pitch this up, right? Now, if it was unwarped, the sample would get shorter, right? So each one, let's take this section right here, for instance. That section, now, if it was unwarped, is really going to only go to, like, let's say right there, right? However, we're trying to keep this sample the same length while still adjusting the pitch. So it has to do something to compensate for that. So it'll play from this transient in this section to right here. And then if I have it on the single, just play all the way through in stop mode, it's just going to stop. And you're going to hear a blank space for this section until the next transient comes along. If I put it on this mode, where it's going to play through, so it'll play to about there, and then it'll repeat. So you'll actually hear that transient a second time, sort of like right there, until it gets to the next transient, where it can now play this section or this section, depending on how sensitive you have it. And this last mode is using the same example. In this section of this clip, it's going to play to wherever it would normally stop, and then it'll actually start playing backwards from there, which can actually be good because you'll notice that you won't immediately get another transient. It won't be as noticeable. You can get so many different types of effects with this, so I'm just going to play through a couple and let you kind of hear the differences there. So this is actually with it going all the way through and then stop. So if I leave it at 100 full sensitivity, it's pretty much just going to play the entire thing. So you do hear how it's a little bit jagged. There's these little tiny breaks in between where it's going to hit the next transient. Now that I pulled it up, when we pulled up a little more, it'll be even more pronounced. And as I pull this sensitivity down, that's kind of telling it how much of the transient to let through. As I pull this down, you're going to get even bigger sort of gaps. I pull all the way down to 1. So you'll actually see that there's really like a ton of little transients like there and there. So that's why you're still getting like a lot of still little transient peaks coming through. Just to take like one other example, let's take like let's take this guy here and kind of just do the same thing really quick. Pull into here, put it on beats mode with the all the way through and then stop. This is with it at 100. Actually, let's just put it on complex for a second so you can kind of hear it all the way. Okay, put it on beats at 100. It's going to sound kind of the same, kind of similar. Oh, let's actually pitch it up a little bit. That's definitely a part of this. And now if I pull all the way down to 1. So you only get a tiny little bit of that transient and then basically like silence until the next transient pops up. So with this, actually, we'll stick with this one for a second. Let's go to the all the way through and then repeat from the beginning of that section. If I put this up at 100, you kind of get a little like pump, like a little extra of something that's going on in each one of those. If I pull it down, it'll be a little more pronounced. All right, and I'll just do the same thing on here too. So put it on this mode. And let me find something even slower to kind of, that's great. Kind of exemplify the same thing here. Put it on the forward both ways. We'll pitch up. So So you hear, like, as it's going, you're going to hear a tiny little bit of this transient, or each transient kind of fill in the gap for the rest of that space right there. So now I'll go to the last one and show you kind of how that sounds too. At 100 again. So it's a little more, it's less noticeable. For instance, as let's say like this piece plays out right here, it'll play. You kind of hear it'll play normally to like about right here. And then for this last little bit where it has to sort of like make up that space, it just starts playing backwards, which is really not that noticeable. It kind of sounds like a little bit of like a shake going on there, but it still keeps it pretty like well intact. If I pull this down out of the way, you may hear it a little bit more. Nope, that's actually just kind of cutting that out, so you hear a little more silence. Okay, great. Beats can be super cool for a lot of things that are not just drums. So to give you an example back on this piano thing right here, if I put this like on the 1 and then stop and pull this down, so sensitivity is letting through less of the transients. And you can hear how it's still kind of going off of the transient. So, but now it's the sensitivity is down, so it's only letting the bigger transients through and less of the smaller ones. So let's talk about real quick in beats mode before we hop off of this one, preserving not based on transients, but just based on a tempo related sync kind of mode. So these are basically just going to be based on your tempo. If I have it in 8s and I have this down to a similar sensitivity where it was, it's just going to be letting things through on every 8th note. So pretty self-explanatory there. So if I go to quarters, same thing. And then with like all my drums and everything too, so you can hear like the actual rhythm. And as I pull this down, again, you're going to get just even shorter little envelopes there. Yep. So I use all these modes a lot. Beats mode is great, like I said, for not just drums, but for everything. You can get really creative with it. All right, great. Let's talk about tones and textures really quick, and then we'll move on to envelope section, which is this module right here. And then that'll about wrap it up. So in tones and texture, these are 2 different modes that you have that both use granulization or like granular synthesis, I guess is the way to put it, to fill in those spaces. So what that means is it essentially takes the sample that you have and splits it into tiny little grains that in this case are not based off of transients or BPM sync. It's based off of the grain size that you set right here. And some really interesting stuff kind of happens. I would say tones and texture are sort of the most experimental modes. You can get some really crazy stuff, especially by like stretching it out or making it like really down pitching it or up pitching it too. So I'll just play around with this for a second so you can kind of get an ear for it. 30, I use it on 30 a lot. Sometimes if I'm going for more specific things, I'll pull up the grain size or make it lower. So with it still at +9 on here. So again, here, let's just listen to it on like complex where it's pretty much. So that's just the sample. If I pull it up to like, let's just go an octave up in complex still. All right, so now I'll put it on tones. So that sounds kind of cool. You can hear how there's like a little stutter, like with each one. It's like da da, and that's because it's taking those grains and it's actually repeating some of those grains to fill in that extra space when the sample should be shorter than it currently is because we have it pitched up. Now let's go if we go down an octave. So now the sample should basically be twice as long as if it was unwarped. And now we get something like this. And go even lower. All right, so let's go to texture. Texture is essentially tones mode with a bit of randomization added. So this flux tells it how much to kind of randomize the grain size throughout the course of playback. So you can get some really interesting things through here. So if I go back up an octave, pull the flux way up, pull this up. If I pull this down a little bit, so yeah, you can get some interesting stuff from there. I'll do the same thing just with one of these rhythmic things as well. Let's put it on like texture. Pull these guys up a little bit. And pull it down a little bit. So you can hear it's not quite hitting all of them. There's a lot of just crazy stuff going on under the hood as, you know, the flux kind of forces the grain size to bounce around and stuff as well. So I would say for stuff with low end in it, like a lot of times 808s and just like big basses and stuff in general, I would say tones is actually a great mode to kind of keep it preserved, interestingly enough. Complex mode will often add in like a bit of filtering that kind of has like a little bit of like phasing stuff going on as well. So I'll pull that in just so you can kind of see what I mean there. Maybe like, let's see. Yeah, let's pull this in. All right, so this is complex. If I pull it up a little bit. All right, you can kind of hear how there's like some kind of resonance, like filter resonance going on as well. And if I put it on tones, which if I take it off warp, you'll see is actually a lot closer to how the original sounds. So with most things with low end in them, I actually really prefer tones a lot of the time. That being said, every now and again, I'll use beats or complex as well, just depending on what I'm going for. So that about wraps up that section right there. Moving on to envelopes, this should be pretty quick to get through. I just want to show you some really cool, quick things that you can do with envelopes. So let's take this off and take that off. Actually, let me just pull this guy up here, play it over this beat here. So let's put warp mode back on this bass here and leave it in tones for right now. Envelope section. And by the way, you can access these by hitting option 1, option 2, bounce back and forth there as a little shortcut to kind of move between them. Now I'm in 11 in Ableton 10. There's like a little activation button like right here on the top that you can click and a little drop down menu. It looks a little different, but it basically works the same. And by the way, if you are in 11 and yours doesn't look like this, it's probably because you have this stretched out. So now you'll see that these are all sort of in little kind of drop down arrow menus over here. You can obviously pull this up too and see more of them. Personally, I like it the other way. I'm just a lot more used to switching back and forth that way. I can do it a little bit quicker with option 1 and option 2. So anyway, mixer, you have clip, EQ8, utility. That's currently all that is on this channel right here. Now, anything that you can automate, which we covered a little bit of basic automation stuff in a previous tutorial based on here, like the gain or the width of this utility, you can also automate, technically speaking, within the clip right here. However, you can't do it with the full scope of that parameter. What I mean by that is this gain can actually go up to 35 decibels or down to negative infinite, right? Put that back in the middle there. On here, you don't have those same exact values. What you have is a percentage out of 100. So whatever the maximum, like this gain is at 0, I can only ever hit the maximum of that gain at 100%, and I can only go down from there. That's pretty much how all of these work. Like if I go to 6 gain, oh yeah, I take that back. It's still a percentage, but you do have like a up 50 or down 50. To be honest with you, I don't really use the automation, like the envelopes in here, for anything other than these clip envelopes right here. Now this is important because let's say if I wanted to draw in some pitch bends and all I have is this sample right here. So let's say I have, pull that out. The clip sounds like this. Okay, if I wanted to automate the transposition of this, you cannot do so with any device. You have to do so, I mean, maybe with like a frequency shifter or something, but the best way to do so is usually just transposing it in here. So I can pull this up. Okay, and you can still curve these just like you can with like any automation line. All right, great. Pretty simple stuff. Same thing with gain. A lot of times, you know, I will use the utility gain here, but a lot of times if I know that I want to just make a certain piece a little bit quiet, I'll just sort of automate something right in here. So the main thing, again, I use this for is transposition, but I want to make sure you knew where that was and make sure that you knew that you could basically use this inside the clip view to automate other things as well, even though, again, I mostly pretty much only use it for clips. And that's similar. I think we did some stuff with MIDI recently where, you know, I showed you how inside the clip view, things like pitch bend and channel pressure and things like that, you can only access that stuff inside the clip view. And I'm sure we'll get back into that as well in the future here. So that about does it. I'll show you like some cool things that you can do just to kind of get your like creative juices flowing. Let's say I took these hats here and did like a little section where I put them, double timed them. Let's say I Command J consolidated that, double clicked on there to open that up, left it in complex mode for now, put the clip, envelope, transposition, and transpose these down. You get kind of an effect like, let me see if I can get it to where I want it, like this. And let's say like I do something like this. I use this a lot, going in for like just little like ear candy, things like that. Transpose it up. So little things like that with drums. I use transposing a lot. I use transposing on audio samples all the time, and you can get some really cool stuff out of it when you start working in different warp modes. Like let's say I do tones, grain size here, and get really, really low. Do something like this. Oh, let's pull this up. So you can start playing around with transposition and the different warp modes to get some really interesting effects. Anyway, that's about it for this tutorial. I wanted to keep it kind of short, not overload you with too much stuff, but just show you some really interesting ways of manipulating audio in there. I guess a couple things I should cover is ways in the arrangement to do some warping as well. If you pull this out, actually, come to think of it, there are a couple things I didn't cover. So I'm going to undo all of this with a quick command delete, pull this in here. If you click anywhere in here, you can actually stretch the audio just like that. You can create as many of these warp markers as you need to and pull them wherever you want, basically making this, you know, do whatever you want with this clip. So pull this out a little more. You can get some really interesting stuff like that. And whenever I'm doing like flips or bootlegs, remixes, stuff like that, a lot of times, especially with acoustic music, it doesn't always line up right on beat. So I will take things like, let's say this happens to be, oh, and my Ableton crashed. Let me pull that back up real quick. Oh, yikes. Yeah, let's go ahead and recover that. All right, let's pull this off and just consolidate that, make that totally off time here. So if I wanted to grab like this transient here and pull that back to there and grab this and pull that there, you can just kind of put stuff wherever you want it by double clicking, creating this little warp marker and moving this stuff around to where you need it to be. So yeah, that's okay. Thanks. Live. So again, keep that in mind. You can also split audio by hitting Command E, and that'll just split wherever your cursor is. You can highlight a section and Command E it, and it'll take it there. You can hit R at any time and reverse it. Like I can reverse this entire, let me just cut this here, hit R on it, and it'll just reverse the entire clip. And now reversing does some really interesting stuff with the different warp modes as well, especially beats. So Definitely use reverses a lot to get some interesting things. There's a way to stretch and warp things without actually doing those little warp markers, which you probably see me do in this tutorial, where if you hold over the edge here, you see how you can kind of like pull out more of this clip or less of this clip. If you hold your mouse right over the edge there and hold shift, you'll see this little arrow pop up. And now as long as warp mode is on, you can actually just pull the clip to wherever you want it. Now, bonus little trick, if while you're doing this, you also hold command, you can get rid of the grid lines and literally just warp this to wherever you want, to wherever to make it like fit in a little section. Like if I want to take, you know, this and make it fit like right in this little section right there. You know, get some cool kind of like off time little fill stuff like. So that's a really cool, easy way to play around with stuff like that. Even like reverse that. So let's see, what else do we have? Back in here, something else I probably should have just covered really quick is that you can automatically double. Let's take this as an example here. Double the length of the sample by hitting the ×2 button. So it'll actually work better if I do it like this, or just take any other sample that's already fully intact. Great, like throw this down here, and if I hit the ×2, it'll make it twice as long. Now if I hit the +2, it'll shorten it. Ooh, let's put that on regular beats so we can have. Yeah, that's not really sounding that great, but yeah, point is you can use those if you just really want to quickly move that stuff. However, usually when I'm doing it, I just pull it out to there using the shift trick. Yeah, and so anyway, I think that actually is it for now. Hopefully that gives you some creative ways to mess with and warp samples in audio. So the next tutorial, I'll be doing a lot more sampling, but actually using simpler and sampler as well, and show you some of the really cool stuff that you can do with those. So thanks, as always. Appreciate you watching, and like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There'll be a lot more of these coming.